Hello, friends. Welcome to Unacademy. Let's crack NEET PG. I'm Dr. Shonali Chandra, and in this video, I will be talking about pelvic inflammatory disease. I have highlighted my reference code here, which is SHONALI. So, if you take a plus subscription from the Unacademy platform, you can use this code to avail a 10% discount on your subscription package. You can also download the Unacademy Learning app and get notified for upcoming sessions. On the platform, you'll get daily live classes where you can chat with your educator, ask your doubts and queries, get them solved there and then. So it's like a live classroom experience. The courses are structured, keeping in line with the latest NEET PG syllabus. There are also live tests and quizzes on the platform, which will help you evaluate your performance as you go along. And most importantly, one subtime subscription gives you an unlimited access, so you can watch all the live sessions from all the faculties who are active on the platform. And even if you miss out on the live sessions, you can always go back and watch the recorded versions from the comfort of your own devices. Top educators are associated with the platform. All 19 subjects which we need to prepare for our postgrad entrance examinations, they are covered. And every now and then, comprehensive batch courses as well as short duration crash courses, they keep getting launched. So you can check out the ongoing courses in the platform as well. And now there's a new module of subscription, which is the Iconic subscription, which allows you to access Unacademy and Prep Ladder at the same time. Now you can take this Iconic subscription for 12, 18, 24, or 36 months duration. And if you subscribe using my code, that is SHONALI, then you can avail a 10% discount on your subscription package. Now, talking about the NEET PG Plus subscription modules, you can choose one depending on your needs and requirements. So if you're targeting the upcoming exams and want a shorter duration crash course, you can take the 1 month or 3 month duration subscription package. If you're targeting the next exams, you can take the 12 months duration package. It will give you ample time to go through all of the sessions and will also leave you enough time in the end to revise as well. It also turns out to be more economical in the longer run. And for those of you who are in your third year, final year MBBS, you're juggling hospital duties and clinics and classes at the same time. For those of you who are simultaneously working and want a slower pace of preparation, you can take the 24 months duration package. Turns out to be far more economical in the longer run. And if you subscribe using my code, that is SHONALI, you can avail a 10% discount on your subscription package. While you're on the platform, you can check out the previous free special classes on the platform, which I've already undertaken. Once you subscribe to the Plus courses, you will access the capsule course on reproductive gynecology. There's one on high risk pregnancy, on gynae oncology, on labor and its complications. There's also a capsule course on early pregnancy complications. So you can check them out on the platform as well. Now, coming back to the session at hand, where I will be discussing pelvic inflammatory disease. Now, what is pelvic inflammatory disease? Now, if you consider the female genital tract, you see the cause of genital tract infection or inflammation mainly depends on the epithelium that is affected. Now, if you consider the infective agents like Trichomonas vaginalis, you consider candidiasis, or you consider herpes simplex viral infections, so they infect primarily lead to inflammation of the ectocervix. Whereas infective agents like chlamydia and gonorrhea, they primarily infect the endocervix, so they lodge deep inside the endocervix. Now, it is these chlamydia and gonorrhea which are lodging in the endocervix, they can gain access and they can ascend upwards into the uterine cavity. They can therefore inflame the endometrial lining, can lead to endometritis. And they can also further extend upwards and lead to tubal infection, and then that can lead to salpingitis, right? And it can even extend further and lead to inflammation of the ovaries, causing oophorytis, right? It can also lead to infection and inflammation of the peritoneal lining of the genital tract. So it can lead to pelvic peritonitis as well. right? So it is a continuum of infection which can lead to upper genital tract infection, actually, right? And sometimes, yes, because of salpingitis and oophorytis occurring together, and a lot of inflammation and fibrosis and scarring happening in this area over a period of time, there can be, in acute phases, there can be salpingo-oophorytis, which can lead to formation of a tubo-ovarian abscess. There can be pus collection inside the fallopian tubes as well. And yes, of course, most of the times this acute infection heals. People take antibiotic treatment for this acute infection, and then it goes on to the chronic stage of infection, where your tubes are all damaged and destroyed, the epithelium lining is destroyed, the cilia are damaged of the fallopian tubes, and the fallopian tubes become swollen with the clear fluid inside them, which we call as hydrosalpinx. And ultimately there can be also beaded tubes and blocked tubes. Altogether, in the chronic stages, can ultimately contribute to infertility as well. Right now, today here we are going to discuss the acute symptomatology of PID. So PID basically is inflammation of the upper genital tract. So the causative organisms of PID are chlamydia and gonorrhea, which can ascend upwards and lead to inflammation of the upper genital tract, which is endometriate, which is endometrial lining, which is the fallopian tubes, which is the ovaries and the pelvic peritoneum. It's a continuum of changes that can take place, continuum of inflammation. So it could be limited to the endometrium itself. It could extend to the fallopian tubes at the same time. So it depends upon what is the severity of this pelvic inflammatory disease. Now, moving on further, let's talk about one very important aspect here, that bacterial vaginosis, which is the alteration in the microflora of the organisms which are naturally residing in the vagina. That is called as bacterial vaginosis, where your lactobacillus is replaced by other gram-negative rods like Gardnerella vaginalis or Mobilingus or Ureaplasma, Provitella. So that occurs concurrently in women with PID, where you have predominance of Gardnerella vaginalis, Peptostreptococci, the anaerobic rods there, and your Previtola there. So these are what can happen, in coincident with PID. And when bacterial vaginosis occurs concurrently, it often facilitates the ascending spread of pathogenic bacteria upwards into the female genital tract. So this one basic information needs to be kept in mind when dealing with acute presentations of pelvic inflammatory disease. However, yes, of course, the most common cause of PID in today's scenario is chlamydia rather than gonorrhea. I mean, gonorrhea used to be common, let's say, 2 to 3 decades ago, but with rampant use of antibiotics against gonorrhea, now chlamydia is the leading cause of PID in women, in reproductive age group women. And one thing that I particularly want to talk about chlamydia is that a number of infections with chlamydia are actually asymptomatic. About 80% of the cases are asymptomatic. That means they don't lead to any of the typical symptoms of PID, and it's just that the infective agents are slowly eating away and gnawing away at the fallopian tubes, and they're causing the damage, and maybe later on can directly present with infertility and not have any acute symptoms at all. Now, other than that, yes, of course, if you can understand here that, chlamydia and gonorrhea, these are sexually transmitted disorders. Therefore, PID is also identified more often in sexually active women. But yes, of course, if there is a PID-like picture in a woman who's never been sexually active, in young adolescent girls who are virgin, well, then always consider the possibility of genital tuberculosis under those circumstances. And if you happen to identify a PID in postmenopausal women, again, do consider E. coli as one of the important causative agents for PID in postmenopausal women as well. Now, moving on further, what is the diagnosis of PID like? How do we make it? So, well, yes, of course, the woman in a case of acute PID is going to present with some of the other symptoms. Now, most often it's pelvic pain. It's chronic pelvic pain. It can be off and on. It can be a continuous, dull, aching, nagging sort of pain in the lower abdomen. She could present with fever. She could also present with the features of urinary tract infection like, dysuria, burning micturition, constipation, frequency of micturition. So there could be associated urinary tract symptoms as well. She could complain with excessive vaginal discharge. And in phases of acute endometritis, when the endometrium is inflamed, she could present with menorrhagia as well. So there can be a number of symptoms. She could present with one or the other symptom, or she could present with all of them. But yes, most of the times, she would present with pelvic pain, most importantly. A fever, if there, will highly raise the suspicion of PID. Often women complain of dysuria, and this vaginal discharge may or may not be there. Menorrhagia may or may not be there. But yes, a combination of all of these features is often encountered. So the diagnosis of PID, mind you, is a mainly clinical diagnosis, which is based upon the symptoms of presentation and your clinical examination findings. So once a woman comes with these sort of complaints, we often do the clinical pelvic examination, which begins with a per speculum and a per vaginal examination, a bimanual pelvic examination. And we do this to satisfy the minimum criteria which is required to diagnose PID. So the minimum criteria involves a physical examination where we note a cervical motion tenderness. We can note presence of an adnexal tenderness or presence of uterine tenderness, and these will be elicited by performing the bimanual pelvic examination. So if you're going to poke at the cervix and move the cervix, then of course there will be a woman will wince in pain because of that. So that will be a cervical motion tenderness. What cervical motion tenderness actually denotes is there is inflammation of the peritoneal lining which is surrounding the cervix, and because the peritoneal lining is inflamed on moving the cervix, the woman has pain. And of course, if the adnexa is also inflamed and swollen, then you're poking at the adnexa from the lateral vaginal fornices would lead to pain there. So adnexal tenderness can be elicited. Palpating the uterus itself would cause pain to the woman, so uterine tenderness can be elicited. So this is the basic minimum criteria which needs to be fulfilled to make the diagnosis of pelvic inflammatory disease. Now, apart from this, there are additional criteria which will add to our diagnosis. So this is the bare minimum that is required. And apart from this, yes, of course, there can be fever which we can find. On per speculum examination, we might find this pus coming out of the cervical os, and that would signify mucopurulent cervicitis there. And this cervical discharge or this endocervical swab can then be tested under the microscope, and you can see a lot of WBCs in the discharge. Or you could also test the cervicovaginal secretions, and you can test this discharge and endocervical swab. You can subject them to nucleic acid amplification tests, which are used for chlamydia and gonorrhea. So cervical discharge could be positive for chlamydia or gonorrhea as well. But these are, yes, additional criteria which add to the diagnosis, but this bare minimum physical criteria should always be met. Now, moving on further, yes, of course, when we talk about PID, this much is the bare minimum that we do, a physical examination. Now, apart from that, there are a number of investigations which we can do to diagnose PID, but those are not necessarily always required. So, yes, of course, you have a definitive criteria which is described, but resorting to the definitive criteria is not always required. I'll give you an example. For example, ultrasound showing a tubo-ovarian mass is considered a definitive criteria, but yes, of course, if on clinical examination, if you are suspecting that there is an adnexal tenderness, there is an adnexal mass that you're palpating, then of course you would like to, elaborate on the type of that adnexal mass on ultrasound. So then it would be a valid indication to do an ultrasound. And there you can see a tubo-ovarian mass. You can always think of it as a tubo-ovarian abscess in the background of fever, in the background of pelvic pain, in the background of physical examination findings consistent with PID. And in addition, you find an ultrasound evidence of a tubo-ovarian abscess or mass, then you'd consider it as a possibility, yes, of course. Now, let's say, for example, a woman has a complaint of menorrhagia and, some pelvic pain associated with it, and it's not always necessary to go ahead and do an endometrial sampling in all of these situations. But yes, of course, if your diagnosis is uncertain, if you happen to perform an endometrial biopsy for some other reason while evaluating for abnormal uterine bleeding or excessive bleeding or menorrhagia, and you happen to find evidence of inflammation there in the histopathology of endometrial tissue, then endometritis on endometrial biopsy is again a definitive criteria. But again, just for the diagnosis of PID, it's not always required to do endometrial biopsy. Now, patients with PID, I told you, over a long period of time, progressively can present with infertility directly also. So there are situations when we encounter infertile women with tubal factor infertility, and we're suspecting blocked tubes, damaged tubes. And then, of course, yes, we also go ahead with tubal patency testings like hysterosalpingography and everything. But if and during the course of evaluation of infertility, we happen to do a laparoscopy, then yes, laparoscopic evidence by itself becomes a definitive criteria. But understand, in a woman presenting with acute PID-like symptoms, you don't necessarily have to resort to a laparoscopy to diagnose PID. So that's what I mean here, that these definitive criteria are resorted to when indicated under specific clinical circumstances. Now, on the laparoscopic evidence, yes, of course, we can see that your pelvis is filled up with adhesions, and you can find the evidence of damaged and destroyed and blocked tubes, swollen tubes, beaded tubes, and your ovaries and fallopian tubes are all stuck together. They're all stuck together behind the uterus, and there are a lot of adhesions which are there. So yes, if you were to examine such a case on clinical examination, you would be able to figure out that there might be restricted mobility of the uterus might be retroverted and fixed. So yes, of course, there will be clinical findings also suggestive of such a pelvis on laparoscopic evidence. You can also find adhesions extending into the abdominal cavity, and you can find adhesions also on the undersurface of the liver there. And this has got a characteristic term for it. This is called the Fitzhugh-Curtis syndrome. Fitzhugh-Curtis syndrome, when you find these adhesions on the undersurface of the pelvis as well. So such kind of findings can be seen on, pelvic inflammatory disease on laparoscopy. But mind you that such laparoscopy is always resorted to when the need arises in workup of infertility patients per se. Now, how about the treatment of pelvic inflammatory disease? Well, that will depend upon the clinical presentation, of course. So let us see these two scenarios here. The first scenario talks about a woman who comes with the complaint of chronic pelvic pain. She also has dysuria. Now, she doesn't have fever. She doesn't have any vomiting. She doesn't have any diarrhea. You do a physical examination. You see that the uterus is normal in size, but it is tender to touch. There's tenderness in the vaginal fornices also, but there's no adnexal mass. So you realize that your minimum criteria for the diagnosis of PID has been made, and based on your clinical findings so far, you do not suspect that there is an adnexal mass. So I would say that an ultrasound will be an additionally just unnecessary investigation. So what I can do is I can start the treatment of this particular woman on the OPD basis. Now, what would be the treatment regime? Now, the treatment regime would be ceftriaxone 250 milligrams intramuscular injection in a single dose. I mean, apart from ceftriaxone, you can give equivalent cephalosporins as well. One could give a single dose of cefoxitin injection also. If injectables are not available, one can also give oral cefixime in a dose of 400 milligrams single dosage, and you will also have to give simultaneously doxycycline, oral doxycycline in a dose of 100 milligram twice daily for 14 days. Now, this would actually cover your chlamydia and gonorrhea. So chlamydia, doxycycline would give coverage against chlamydia. Your ceftriaxone, cephalosporin would give coverage against gonorrhea. And most of the times you see when there is PID and you don't really know and you don't have a test report of whether it's chlamydia or gonorrhea, they often coexist together. So they're often treated together. And to add or not add metronidazole, well, most of the times we do add metronidazole to provide extra anaerobic coverage, because cephalosporins by themselves do not give complete anaerobic coverage. And more so, we are also saying that, bacterial vaginosis often coexists. So yes, of course, it becomes very feasible to add metronidazole treatment as well at the same time. And metronidazole in a dose of 500 milligrams twice daily can be given for 14 days. So this is the OPD based treatment of a pelvic inflammatory disease. Partner treatment need also be given because, again, PID, the causative agents are sexually transmitted. During the course of this treatment, during the 14 days of course of treatment, intercourse is avoided, asked to avoid intercourse, and if they at least condoms should be used for that much period. And since a woman is on metronidazole, and if you're treating the partner and he's also taking metronidazole, so yes, of course, alcohol should not be used while on treatment with metronidazole. It can lead to the disulfiram-like action. So these are small points that you need to take care when giving treatment for PID. Now, moving on further, let's have a look at another scenario. Now, a woman comes with a complaint of acute, severe pelvic pain and dysuria. Now, she has fever. Let's say she has high-grade fever. She also has diarrhea. She also has severe vomiting. Physical examination shows that there is lower abdominal tenderness and guarding is also present. So now you're thinking, okay, there is some element of pelvic peritonitis there as well, which is flaring up. The uterus is normal in size but tender. There's tenderness in the vaginal fornifis, and now you're able to also palpate a tender adnexal mass on the right side. So now would be a good reason to go for ultrasound evaluation for the presence of a tubo-ovarian abscess. And since this woman is clinically very sick, you see, she is clinically very symptomatic, acute severe pelvic pain, diarrhea and severe vomiting. So she is unlikely to tolerate the oral medication which we just discussed prior to this. So it would be a good idea to give her inpatient treatment, right? And since she's also suffering from diarrhea, I mean, pelvic peritonitis or a pelvic abscess often irritates the gut and can lead to reactive diarrhea because of that reason. And of course, you would need IV fluid management, analgesics, alongside an anti-emetic treatment, alongside the antibiotic treatment, which has to be given by the IV route. So initially, yes, till the woman is symptomatically better, at least it will take another 24 to 48 hours for these IV medications to act and make the woman symptomatically better. And once she's able to tolerate orally and once she's feeling clinically better, one can switch over to the oral regime of the same drug. So the inpatient treatment is usually cefoxitin 2 grams IV 6 hourly. You also have to give doxycycline at the same time, 100 milligrams oral or IV. Now I say IV, yes, you can begin IV, but giving doxycycline IV is a very painful injection. So one can, as soon as possible, one should try switching over to oral doxycycline treatment. And yes, if you are not sure that there is bacterial vaginosis or not, it is always better to give metronidazole simultaneously as well, 500 milligrams IV 12 hourly. So it's often given together in this broad spectrum antibiotic regime for a wider anaerobic coverage there. And within the next 24 to 48 hours, when she's symptomatically better, tolerating orally, the diarrhea is better, she's not vomiting anymore, you can switch over to the oral drugs and then complete the full 14-day therapy. Then complete the full 14-day therapy, which is recommended for PID treatment. So this is about the clinical management of acute PID, my friends. So keep this in mind. What are the indications for hospitalization in a case of acute PID? I mean, it's not required for all set of women. So yes, of course, the indications of hospitalization would become a suspected pelvic abscess. Now, in a case of suspected pelvic abscess, like we just discussed in the previous case scenario, where you have a suspicion of a tubo-ovarian abscess, the treatment is to begin antibiotic treatment at the earliest. And if antibiotic response is achieved, you see, if movement is improving and she is better, then that is all that is required. Yes, if your antibiotic treatment has failed, it is not working, she's not improving despite you giving the antibiotic treatment, then one can resort to draining this pelvic abscess. And usually ultrasound guided drainage is what is preferred in most circumstances, being less invasive. But yes, sometimes sometimes in severe peritonitis and septic cases, one might need to resort to laparotomy and drainage as well. But that will also depend upon the clinical profile of the woman. How sick is she? Is she improving on antibiotics or not? So that will be taken into consideration. Whether she has frank peritonitis or not, that would be taken into consideration. And if she is severely septic, if she's not improving on the IV regime, which we discussed earlier, one can also change the antibiotic treatment to clindamycin and gentamicin combination, which is a very good broad spectrum antibiotic coverage. So one could up the antibiotics if the patient inpatient treatment is not working. If it's a clinically severe disease, that's a valid indication for hospitalization. Pregnant women with acute severe PID should definitely be admitted and treated. And of course, there is non-compliance to oral treatment or inability to tolerate oral treatment. I mean, then it would be a justified indication for hospitalization in a case of acute PID. So this is the discussion that I wanted to have, you guys. I hope you liked this video on PID. This is about the acute management of PID cases. And please check out the previous special classes that I've taken on the platform already. Once you subscribe to the Plus course, you can get access to the capsule courses as well. And keep giving me your suggestions regarding any such further videos that you would like to, you would like me to take. So feel free to offer it your suggestions. Thank you guys so much. Subscribe to the channel. Have a great day. Bye-bye and take care.